ما با معترض حرف میزنیم، باید حرف بزنن مسئولین با معترض.
The only sound echoing through the streets of Tehran today is the constant collision between a frightened regime and an angry population, as the capital of one of the world's oldest civilizations sinks into what many now describe as the darkest and most uncertain moment of its modern history, where authority no longer looks confident or powerful, but instead appears nervous, reactive, and exhausted, as if the system itself is struggling to breathe. As the first days of 2026 unfold, Iran has not simply woken up to protests or temporary unrest, but to a deep national crisis that feels closer to a rehearsal for civil war than a political movement, with chaos spreading across society and trust collapsing at every level. On one side of this conflict are regime forces conducting aggressive raids, breaking down doors in the middle of the night, detaining young people without explanation, and flooding neighborhoods with fear. While on the other side are ordinary citizens desperately searching for a way out, rushing toward airports with suitcases filled not with luxury, but with last hopes, only to discover that escape has been cut off. Each time the ruling system senses that its grip is weakening, it responds with more force, more arrests, and more bloodshed. Yet this violence no longer produces obedience or silence. Instead, it produces anger, resentment, and a growing belief among the population that there is nothing left to lose. What is happening in Iran today is no longer just a series of street protests or political demonstrations, but a final survival attempt by a leadership that appears willing to spend its last resources, its last credibility, and even its last bullets to stay in power. One of the clearest and most disturbing images of this collapse is unfolding not in the streets, but inside Imam Khamenei International Airport, where thousands of Iranians have gathered in a desperate attempt to flee the country, carrying bags, documents, and children, only to find themselves trapped in crowded terminals that feel more like detention halls than gateways to freedom. Reports indicate that more than 50 international flights have been canceled or postponed indefinitely, as major global airlines such as Lufthansa, Turkish Airlines, and Emirates have labeled Iranian airspace a high-risk zone and suspended operations, effectively sealing the country from the outside world and turning Tehran into an open-air prison. Inside the airport, engineers, doctors, students, artists, and skilled professionals sleep on concrete floors, refreshing their phones for updates that never come, representing not just a brain drain, but a nation attempting to escape itself, as those who should be building Iran's future instead wait for a flight that may never arrive. These flight cancellations are widely seen not as technical or security issues, but as a deliberate strategy by the regime, a form of collective punishment designed to trap people inside the country and force submission, sending a cruel and simple message: if we cannot survive, neither can you. While this drama plays out in public terminals under bright lights and security cameras, a very different story is rumored to be unfolding behind closed doors, in VIP areas and private hangars, where members of the ruling elite are allegedly planning their own exits, moving families to protected locations and quietly transferring cash, gold, and assets to foreign allies such as Russia, revealing a system that demands sacrifice from the people while secretly preparing to abandon them. These rumors have begun to poison loyalty within the lower ranks of the Revolutionary Guards and security services, as officers question why they should risk their lives for leaders who appear to be building lifeboats for themselves, creating cracks in what was once considered the regime's strongest shield. The reason so many Iranians are now willing to sleep on airport floors or risk everything to leave is rooted in the regime's increasingly brutal internal strategy, which has gone far beyond crowd control or law enforcement and now resembles a campaign of intimidation and punishment against its own population. Leaked videos and reports describe security forces and special units conducting violent door-to-door operations in cities such as Tehran, Mashhad, and Zahedan, where homes are entered by force at night, families are terrorized, and young men and women are taken away without charges or explanation, often disappearing into unknown detention centers. International human rights organizations have reported tens of thousands of arrests and thousands of deaths, numbers that paint a picture of a state fighting its own society rather than governing it. Yet this strategy has backfired in a way the leadership appears unable or unwilling to understand. because instead of frightening people into silence, these raids are radicalizing entire neighborhoods, turning grief into anger and fear into resistance, as families who lose sons, daughters, or neighbors no longer see compromise as an option. Every broken door creates new enemies, and every arrest strengthens the belief that the system cannot be reformed from within. As trust inside the regime erodes, even among its own forces, the leadership is reportedly turning to foreign militias for support, relying on fighters from outside the country who are ideologically loyal but socially disconnected from the Iranian population, a move that further exposes how isolated the leadership has become from its own people. This reliance on outsiders is seen by many Iranians as the ultimate betrayal, proof that the regime no longer believes it can survive with domestic support alone. What is unfolding across Iran today is not a temporary crisis that can be solved with reforms, negotiations, or concessions, but a deep structural breakdown where fear has lost its power, legitimacy has evaporated, and escape routes are being closed for the public, while quietly opened for the elite. The country now stands at a dangerous crossroads, where continued repression risks pushing society into uncontrollable chaos, and retreat risks immediate collapse, leaving a leadership trapped by its own choices and a population that no longer believes in promises, slogans, or threats. Iran is entering a period where the old rules no longer apply, where anger is replacing fear, where loyalty is breaking apart, and where the struggle is no longer about politics or ideology, but about survival on both sides, with consequences that will not stay contained within its borders, but will echo across the entire Middle East and beyond. The growing use of foreign militias that have no emotional or national connection to the Iranian people, unlike Iranian soldiers who may hesitate to fire on their own citizens, is rapidly dragging the country toward a full-scale civil war, because these outside forces act without restraint and deepen the sense that the state has turned against the nation itself. This strategy is fueling a powerful wave of nationalist anger across Iran, as many people now believe they are being beaten and controlled by foreigners inside their own homeland, a feeling that is expanding the protests far beyond political activists and placing the regime in the role of an occupying power rather than a government. As this anger spreads, resistance groups are beginning to adapt their tactics, especially in Iran's mountainous regions, where geography naturally favors guerrilla warfare, and in areas such as Kurdistan and Baluchistan, small armed groups are reportedly using hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, and local knowledge to challenge security forces. While the regime still tries to project control in major cities and central regions, it is slowly losing influence on the edges of the country, where state authority is weakening, borders are becoming porous, and the risk of long-term internal conflict is growing. At the same time, as people attempt to flee for safety and freedom, those who remain inside Iran are being crushed by a collapsing economy that makes daily survival increasingly difficult. The ruling system, unable to silence the population through violence alone, has turned to what it believes is a financial solution, announcing cash payments of roughly 300,000 to 350,000 tomans for citizens in protest-heavy areas and for low-income families, hoping to buy silence and reduce anger. In reality, this amount is painfully small in a country suffering from extreme inflation, currency collapse, and soaring food prices, where such a payment cannot even cover a basic meal for a family, let alone rent or medical costs. Instead of calming the streets, this move has deeply insulted the public, leading many to openly mock the regime and ask whether their dignity, their pain, and the blood of their loved ones are really worth such a small sum. Reports from inside Iran show that many people are either refusing the money outright or accepting it out of necessity, while still returning to the streets chanting slogans calling for the downfall of the leadership, making it clear that the struggle has moved far beyond economic demands and into a demand for complete political change. What the leadership and its advisors fail to understand is that anger born from loss, grief, and humiliation cannot be erased with cash handouts, and that no amount of money can compensate a mother for a murdered child or a family for a disappeared son. The real economic threat to the regime is not coming from these symbolic payments, but from the heart of Iran's industrial system, where strikes are spreading across key oil and petrochemical facilities. Workers in critical energy centers, such as Asaluya and Abadan, are shutting down production, closing valves, and openly linking their labor protests to political slogans demanding regime change. This development is far more dangerous for the leadership than street demonstrations, because Iran's oil industry is the financial backbone of the state, and history has shown that when oil workers strike, governments fall, as happened during the 1979 revolution. If the regime loses control over oil revenues, it faces the risk of total financial collapse, leaving it unable to fund security forces, pay government salaries, or even compensate the foreign militias it has brought in to suppress unrest. As pressure mounts internally, the leadership is trying to shift attention away from the suffering at airports and on the streets by drawing powerful international allies into the conflict, most notably Russia. Moscow has no interest in seeing the Iranian system collapse, as it relies on Tehran for drones, missiles, and political alignment in its war in Ukraine. And for this reason, the Russian government is reportedly providing not only diplomatic backing, but also technical and security assistance. According to multiple foreign policy reports, Russian cargo planes have delivered advanced internet blocking systems, cyber surveillance tools, and riot control technology to Tehran, aimed at helping the authorities shut down communications, track activists, and prevent protests from organizing. This digital shield was designed to isolate the population, silence opposition voices, and restore fear through information control. But it has produced unexpected results. When internet access was cut, people did not stay home and become passive. Instead, they poured into the streets to see events with their own eyes, turning digital silence into physical unrest and replacing online communication with direct, face-to-face mobilization. Even more damaging for the regime, Elon Musk's Starlink satellite system emerged as a powerful tool for resistance, as thousands of terminals reportedly smuggled into Iran allowed activists to bypass state controls and stay connected to the outside world during blackout periods. Through these decentralized networks, videos of protests, police brutality, and state violence were shared globally in real time, making it impossible for the authorities to fully hide their actions or control the narrative. As repression intensifies, international reactions are also becoming stronger, with Iranian diaspora communities and opposition figures coordinating efforts in Western capitals to isolate the regime diplomatically. High-profile appearances by opposition leaders, including Reza Pahlavi in Washington, have boosted morale inside Iran and drawn greater attention to the crisis, while statements of support from figures in the U.S. Senate and European politics are increasing pressure on Tehran. The leadership now finds itself fighting not only its own people, but also global public opinion, as its image shifts from that of a resistant state to that of an abusive system clinging to power. Psychologically, this shift may be the most damaging of all, because a regime that once built legitimacy by portraying external enemies as evil is now being seen by its own population as the true enemy. The burning of official posters, the mocking of state symbols, and the open rejection of fear show a society that has crossed a critical mental threshold, where obedience is no longer expected and authority is no longer respected. Iran is entering a phase where control through force, money, technology, and propaganda is failing all at once, and where every attempt to tighten the grip only accelerates resistance, pushing the country closer to a point of no return. The growing reaction against religious symbols and the fact that many clerics can no longer walk safely in the streets clearly shows that the wall of fear has been broken, and the old culture of respect and obedience has collapsed completely. Because when people stop fearing sacred symbols, a regime loses its deepest source of control. The frozen flight boards at Imam Khomeini Airport, which were mentioned at the beginning, have become a powerful symbol of this collapse, as the word "cancelled" on those screens feels like a message about the regime's own future being cancelled. Neither foreign-made jamming systems, nor small cash handouts of 350,000 tomans, nor violent door-to-door raids appear capable of stopping what is unfolding, because the Iranian people have entered a phase where there is no turning back. Those who can leave the country are doing so, while those who remain are making daily life increasingly difficult for the authorities, turning Tehran into an ungovernable city. By closing escape routes, the leadership is unintentionally trapping inside the country the very population that may eventually bring about its downfall. Because when exits close, revolutionary pressure builds inside. A system that offers humiliating financial aid, shuts down its own airspace, and relies on foreign militias to control its citizens has already lost its legitimacy in the eyes of the people. It is late at night in Iran, and while no one knows who will still be in power when morning comes, it is clear that whoever remains will no longer rule with the same authority. At the same time, the crisis is spreading beyond Iran's borders, as financial collapse begins to weaken the so-called axis of resistance, stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, something closely watched by U.S. and Israeli intelligence. For years, Iran funded regional proxy groups like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and factions in Gaza using billions taken from its own economy. But now banks are frozen, oil production is disrupted by strikes, and state funds are running dry. Reports suggest that Hezbollah fighters have already faced delayed salaries for months, creating internal frustration, while reduced support has reportedly forced the Houthis to slow their operations, showing that Iran's regional power is weakening just as its internal control fades. The leadership now faces an impossible choice: spend its last reserves paying foreign militias and security forces at home, or continue funding proxy groups abroad, because doing both is no longer financially possible, and loyalty rarely survives when money stops flowing. Amid this chaos, a major unanswered question remains about Iran's regular army, the Artesh, whose role could decide the country's future, just as it did in 1979 when neutrality helped bring down the Shah. While the Revolutionary Guards lead repression, many believe lower and mid-level army officers resent the Guards' power and corruption, and may refuse to fire on civilians or even stay in their barracks, which alone could tip the balance. If the army declines to act against the people or turns against the Guards, that moment could mark the real end of the current system. Finally, internal power struggles are intensifying, with rumors about the supreme leader's health and claims that succession plans involving his son are being resisted by old elites, meaning that while the streets burn, political knives are being sharpened behind palace doors. A divided leadership cannot control a united population, and Iran now appears to be heading not just toward political change, but toward a deep transformation that could permanently reshape the state.